Well, thank you very much. And before we begin on the plane, this is a brand new hangar because, as you probably have learned, these planes are much bigger. The other plane was about 35 years old, and it was time, and President of the United States, numerous of them, would land, and they'd be standing next to one of the new 747s. And the biggest difference is the difference in size. It's like virtually double the size. And actually on a runway, it looks even more so. And I said to myself, you know, these countries, they have a lot of respect for us, a lot. And yet they have a plane that's much better and much newer. It's a little ridiculous out there. And we have our signal and we have our beautiful American flag, and we put the wave in it. As you know, we've always gone with this straight little noodle, and I never loved that. Now we have a wavy, beautiful flag. We're waving it proudly because our country is doing so well. Our country's doing so well. Those ships are flowing out of the...
All right, guys, Dr. John here. So this is happening right now. Trump delivered a speech in a massive Air Force One hangar at Joint Base Andrews, but the crowd was shockingly, embarrassingly tiny inside the enormous space. The footage, spreading like wildfire across social media and news outlets, captures in one devastating visual everything critics have been warning about and supporters have been denying. You could see empty seats. You could see huge empty spaces and empty rows where people should have been standing or sitting. You could see the vast emptiness of the hangar compared to the small cluster of actual supporters who were there. The visual contrast between the size of the venue and the actual number of people who cared enough to show up was absolutely stark and telling. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is how Trump looked and how he sounded. His delivery was low energy. He was rambling. He was halting. He was struggling through his remarks like he was exhausted, like he was barely able to get through the speech.
Hormuz Strait like nobody's ever seen before, actually. There were a lot of them, about 700 of them, and they're pouring out. The oil is all over the place. You're going to see oil drop so low. I hope the companies are happy about it. But we have a lot of victories. We had a great victory in Venezuela, where we're now doing really well with the government. The big companies are all in there, the oil companies. They're building rigs, and we've paid for that war many, many times over. We're running it. And again, we have a fantastic relationship with the people of Venezuela. Venezuela has become a happy country because they have never made the money that they're making now. We take some and they take some. But I just want to thank the general for the job. Raising Cane. I liked his name right away. I had him. Raising Cane. And he does. He raises Cane, and he's very quiet about it. But he knows how to win. I knew that a long time ago. I said, if I ever get back here, I know the guy I'm going to put in charge of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
There were all these moments where he kind of trailed off or lost his train of thought or seemed confused about what he was talking about. It was the opposite of the confident, energetic Trump that his supporters always brag about. It was the opposite of the guy who supposedly has massive rallies with overflowing crowds. The visuals of this event are already being used by critics and commentators to paint a picture of a president who is drained, a president who is struggling, a president whose energy is gone. Midas Touch put out a video calling it a disaster speech to a very tiny crowd. Other commentators are talking about it as proof that Trump's whole brand is collapsing. They're calling it a visual collapse of his strongman image. And they're not wrong, because the contrast is just so stark and so obvious. You can see it right there on the screen. But here's what makes this really damaging. There's not just this one event.
And I got my man. So thank you, General. Great job. We're proud of you. And all of the people. I mean, we have the greatest military anywhere in the world. And you saw that in Iran, where in 1 week, virtually, we knocked out their entire Navy, their entire Air Force, their anti-missile weapons, their radar. We knocked out everything. Now, some of the fake news would say, oh, we didn't do it fast enough or something. We took about a week. We're a little spoiled by Venezuela, but equal, I would say equal. And now we have an agreement that was signed last night, and it's 60 days. They have to make a deal. Otherwise, we will do things that won't make them happy, but I don't think it's going to get to that. I think it's going to be very good. Remember, if we do that, then all of a sudden you're not going to have the oil flowing out of the strait too quickly, because people that own billion-dollar ships don't love missiles flying over them, don't love mines all over the water.
There's a pattern. Trump has been having tiny crowd events in other places too. Vegas, Pennsylvania. Multiple events where the crowd just didn't show up the way they used to. Multiple events where the energy feels low. Multiple events where Trump looks exhausted and tired. So this AF1 hangar moment isn't just a one-off bad day. It's part of a broader pattern of Trump's rallies and his events looking less impressive and less energetic than they used to be. And then on top of all that, there's the physical stuff. There's been footage circulating of Trump struggling on the stairs of Air Force One, stumbling, almost falling, looking unsteady. And then there's the footage of him collapsing into his limousine after getting off the plane, his head rolling back, him sighing, looking completely wiped out like he could barely stay awake.
And this is going to be amazing what's happening now, because we have the greatest economy that we've ever had. We have $19.2 trillion coming into our country from other countries and people. But a lot of other countries, they're coming in, including Qatar, who was so nice in providing. You know, we were at a little bit of a logjam. We're waiting for I call them the normal 747s. And I asked the Emir if we could use the brand new 747 that he got when we first heard about it, 800 hours. 800 hours for an airplane is essentially, I think, Troy, you could say that's a brand new plane. And I said, we'd like to use it for a little while because the planes are pretty old. Our planes are old. See, a normal president wouldn't do this. A normal president wants to stay away from aircraft. We don't want to order any aircraft so that everybody thinks, but our country has to be represented properly. That includes we have the greatest military in the world. We have the greatest aircraft anywhere in the world, military fighters and bombers, and the B-2 bomber. You saw what that did. And we should have a plane.
That's not the image of a vital, energetic leader. That's the image of someone who is exhausted, someone who is struggling with the physical demands of the job. When you combine the tiny crowd at the hangar with the low-energy speech, with the stumbling on the stairs, with the collapsing in the limo, you get a narrative that's devastating for Trump. You get evidence that his whole brand is collapsing, that he doesn't have the energy he used to have, that he's not the vital, dominant leader that his supporters claim he is. And that's a narrative that's incredibly powerful and incredibly hard for Trump to fight because it's all visual evidence, it's all right there on camera, you can see it happening. Let's talk about what actually happened at this AF1 hangar event and why it's so damaging and what it means for Trump's political brand and his image. According to Midas Touch and other outlets covering the event, Trump showed up at Joint Base Andrews to deliver remarks at what was supposed to be some kind of unveiling of a new aircraft or some kind of diplomatic thing with Qatar. It was supposed to be a presidential moment. It was supposed to be something that shows strength and confidence and command. But the reality was completely different. The hangar is a massive space. It's enormous. But when Trump showed up to speak, there was barely anyone there to listen. The crowd was shockingly small, tiny. You could see row after row of empty space. You could see how sparse the actual attendees were. You could see the visual contrast between the size of the venue and the actual number of people who cared enough to show up. That visual contrast tells a story. It tells a story about declining enthusiasm. It tells a story about declining crowds. It tells a story about Trump not being able to draw the massive crowds that he likes to brag about constantly. Then there's how Trump performed at this event. His delivery was low energy. He was rambling. He was struggling. He was stumbling through his remarks like he was exhausted or confused or both. He was losing his train of thought. He was making weird tangents. He wasn't crisp and sharp like a president should be. He wasn't commanding the room. He wasn't energetic and engaged. He looked tired. He looked drained. He looked like someone who didn't want to be there and who was barely able to get through it. According to commentators and observers who watched the footage, this isn't just about one bad speech. This is part of a pattern. Trump has been having trouble drawing big crowds recently. His Vegas event had fewer people than expected. His Pennsylvania speech to a supposedly tiny crowd became a viral moment of him collapsing and rambling. Multiple recent events have had this pattern of underwhelming attendance and low energy performances. So this AF1 hangar moment is just the latest example of something that's been happening for a while now. now. Trump's ability to draw massive crowds and to deliver energetic performances is declining. Then there's all the other footage that's been circulating of Trump looking physically exhausted and struggling around Air Force One. There's footage of him slowly and carefully descending the stairs of Air Force One after landing and stumbling or almost falling while doing so. There's footage of him struggling to maintain his balance. There's footage of him practically collapsing into his limousine seat after getting off the plane, his head rolling back against the seat, looking completely and utterly wiped out and exhausted. There's the now famous clip of him sighing heavily and just looking absolutely drained and tired as he gets into the vehicle. This isn't old footage. This is recent. This is from recent trips on Air Force One. This is showing the current condition of the president. The hangar speech and the stumbling and the exhaustion clips all matter because they're in direct contradiction to Trump's entire brand and his entire political identity. Trump's whole thing is that he's this unstoppable force. He's this energetic dynamo who works constantly and never gets tired and is always on top of everything. He's the guy who supposedly has the most massive rallies with the biggest crowds. He's the guy who is always strong and always dominant and always in control. That's his brand. That's what his supporters believe about him. That's the image he projects. But when you have visual evidence that contradicts that brand, when you have footage of him giving a low-energy speech to a tiny crowd, when you have footage of him stumbling on stairs and collapsing in his limousine looking exhausted, when you have a pattern of smaller and smaller crowds and lower energy, then the whole brand starts to crack. The whole narrative starts to fall apart. That's incredibly damaging because visuals are more powerful than words in modern politics. A viral clip of Trump looking exhausted in a hangar with a tiny crowd will do more damage than 100 articles or speeches. The thing that makes this so damaging is that this footage is going to be used in campaign ads, in opposition research, and in viral compilations for the next year or more. People are going to splice together the hangar speech with the stumbling on the stairs, with the exhaustion clips, with his 2016 rally footage, and ask what happened. Where did his energy go? Why does he look so tired? That's a powerful narrative because it's based on visual evidence. It's not spin or interpretation. It's literally what happened on camera. The timing of this is also significant because there's been an increasing conversation about age and stamina and fitness to serve in American politics. Voters are already worried about aging leaders and whether they have the physical and mental stamina to handle the demands of the presidency. When Trump gives a rambling speech to a tiny crowd and stumbles on stairs and collapses in his limo looking exhausted, that feeds directly into those concerns. That makes voters who are already worried about these issues even more concerned. That validates their worries. Let's break down what this moment actually means and why it matters so much politically and what the long-term implications are. The first thing you need to understand is that this AF1 hangar event is a visual disaster for Trump. In modern politics, visuals matter more than anything else. A viral clip is more powerful than a speech. A photograph is more powerful than a policy position. This hangar event gave his critics exactly what they needed visually to tell the story they want to tell about Trump's decline. The tiny crowd is devastating on its own because it contradicts Trump's constant bragging about having the biggest rallies and the most enthusiastic supporters. For years, Trump has gone on and on about his massive rallies. He's talked about how his crowds are bigger than anyone else's. He's bragged about the energy and the enthusiasm of his supporters. Then you have this footage of him in a massive hangar with a tiny crowd. That visual contradiction is incredibly powerful. It undercuts everything he says about his support and his rallies. The low-energy, rambling performance is devastating because Trump's brand depends on projecting dominance and energy and control. He's supposed to be the strong guy, the guy who's always in charge, the guy who commands every room. But when he gives a halting, low-energy, rambling speech where he loses his train of thought and struggles to connect his ideas, that damages that brand. That makes him look weak instead of strong. That makes him look tired instead of energetic. For Trump, whose entire political identity is built on projecting strength and dominance, that's devastating. The physical exhaustion angle is devastating because of what it means for concerns about his health and his stamina. There are already voters who are worried about Trump's age and his stamina and whether he's physically capable of handling the demands of being president. When they see footage of him stumbling on stairs and collapsing in his limo looking exhausted, that reinforces those concerns. wins. That gives them visual proof that their worries might be justified. That's powerful, and it's hard to counter because it's all right there on video. Trump can't easily explain away or defend against these visuals. He can't just claim it's fake news or media bias because the footage is real. He can't just dismiss it as one bad moment because there's a pattern of small crowds and low energy. He can't just say he was tired that day because the stumbling and the exhaustion have happened multiple times on camera. This isn't something he can spin or dismiss. It's evidence that's hard to refute. The footage will be weaponized in opposition ads and media because campaigns use viral clips and compelling visuals to make their argument to voters. Trump's opponents now have incredibly powerful visual material. They can splice together the HANGAR speech with his 2016 rally footage and ask voters whether Trump still has the energy and the stamina to be president. They can use the stumbling clips to raise questions about his physical health. They can use the exhaustion footage to tell a story about a president who's struggling and drained. Those ads are going to be effective because they're not based on opinion or spin. They're based on actual footage of what happened. Voters will see it with their own eyes. They'll draw their own conclusions. Those conclusions are likely to be negative for Trump because the visual evidence clearly shows decline and exhaustion and lower energy and smaller crowds. This also matters for Trump's control over his own narrative and his own brand. One of Trump's superpowers has always been his ability to control the narrative. He sets the agenda, he defines himself, he tells his supporters who he is and what he stands for, and they believe him. But when you have viral footage that directly contradicts what he's been saying about himself, that undermines his ability to control the narrative. The footage tells its own story. The visuals speak for themselves. That matters because Trump's hold on his supporters and his hold on the Republican Party is partially based on the image and the narrative that he's cultivated. If the narrative cracks, if the image starts to collapse, then his political power weakens. If voters start to see him as tired and exhausted instead of energetic and dominant, if they start to worry about his stamina instead of believing he's unstoppable, then his appeal to voters changes. That's bad for him going into elections. The momentum and enthusiasm angle matters because campaigns are won by energy and enthusiasm and the ability to mobilize supporters. If Trump's crowds are getting smaller and his energy is lower and the overall enthusiasm for his events is declining, that's a real practical problem for his campaign infrastructure and his ability to turn out voters. Smaller crowds mean fewer people getting energized and motivated to vote. Lower energy means less enthusiasm spreading to supporters. That directly affects his ability to win elections. We're going to see this HANGAR footage and these exhaustion clips and these tiny crowd images used over and over again in opposition media and in campaign ads. We're going to see commentators and critics continuing to point to these visuals as evidence of Trump's decline and his inability to maintain the image of strength and dominance that his political brand depends on. We're going to see voters who are already concerned about Trump's age and stamina use this footage as validation of those concerns. This AF1 HANGAR moment is part of a larger story about Trump's political position and his power and his ability to command the party and command the movement that he's built. If he's not drawing the massive crowds anymore, if his energy is declining, if he's looking exhausted and struggling on camera, if there's visual evidence that he's not the vital force he used to be, then that changes his political calculus. It changes how Republicans think about him. It changes how swing voters think about him. It changes the entire political landscape because Trump's power has always been partly based on myth. The myth that he's unstoppable. The myth that he's energetic and vital. The myth that he has massive crowds and overwhelming support. When the visuals crack that myth, when footage shows the opposite, that myth starts to fall apart. Once the myth starts to fall apart, everything that's built on it becomes vulnerable. His hold on the party becomes vulnerable. His appeal to swing voters becomes vulnerable. His entire political position becomes more fragile. This tiny crowd in an AF1 HANGAR isn't just a bad optic. It's not just one bad moment. It's visual proof of something that a lot of people have been whispering about or worrying about. It's proof that Trump's energy is declining. It's proof that his crowds are getting smaller. It's proof that the myth of Trump, the unstoppable force, is starting to crack. That has real implications for everything that comes next politically. That's the real story here. That's what makes this moment so significant. It's not just about one speech to a tiny crowd. It's about what that speech and that crowd and the visuals from that event tell us about where Trump actually is right now, politically and physically. It's about the beginning of the end of a myth. Myths are incredibly powerful in politics. They keep movements alive. They keep supporters energized. They keep party members afraid to challenge a leader. But when the myth starts to crack and the visuals show something different from what people have been told, that's when things start to change. That's when supporters start to question. That's when party members start to feel less afraid. That's when opponents gain momentum and confidence. That's exactly what's happening with Trump right now. The hangar speech and the tiny crowd and the stumbling and the exhaustion are all parts of a larger picture that's emerging about Trump's actual position and his actual condition. That picture is very different from the myth that's been cultivated and promoted. The myth says Trump is unstoppable and energetic and vital and has massive crowds. The reality, according to the video evidence, is that he's exhausted and his crowds are tiny and his energy is low. That's a massive gap between myth and reality. That gap between myth and reality is what ends political movements. This moment with the AF1 hangar and the tiny crowd and the low energy speech is going to matter. It's going to be remembered. It's going to be cited. It's going to be used in ads and in media and in conversations about whether Trump still has it. It's going to be pointed to as the moment when the cracks in the facade became impossible to ignore. There's going to be evidence that something has changed with Trump, that he's not the same force he was before, that maybe the moment has passed. For a politician whose entire identity and power is based on being unstoppable and vital and energetic, that's the worst kind of visual evidence. That's the most damaging kind of moment. That's the kind of thing that can't be unseen by voters. That's the kind of thing that plants doubt in people's minds. Once doubt is planted, it grows. Once it grows, it becomes hard for a political figure to come back from it. This AF1 hangar event is going to be compared directly to Trump's 2016 rally footage. People are going to put side-by-side comparison clips of Trump at massive packed rallies in 2016 versus Trump at this tiny crowd in the AF1 hangar. That contrast is going to be incredibly powerful visually. People are going to see the difference immediately. They're going to see how much things have changed. They're going to see the decline in crowd size and crowd energy and overall appeal. This is devastating footage because it can't be spun or explained away easily. It's not a matter of interpretation or perspective. It's right there on video. A tiny crowd, an empty hangar, a low energy speech, stumbling, exhaustion. These are facts. These are visuals that everyone can see and interpret themselves. The interpretation that most people will draw is that Trump has lost something, that he's not the force he used to be, that his time might be passing. For a politician whose entire brand is built on being an unstoppable force with overwhelming support and massive rallies and endless energy, that's the worst kind of evidence. That's the kind of evidence that can't be fought with words or spin. It can only be fought with new visuals that contradict it. If Trump can't generate those new visuals because he can't draw the massive crowds anymore, then he's stuck. He's trapped by the very footage and the very visuals that are supposed to prove his strength, instead proving his weakness and his decline. This moment, with the AF1 hangar and the tiny crowd and the low energy speech and the stumbling and the exhaustion, is going to be remembered. It's going to be cited constantly. It's going to be used in opposition ads. It's going to be part of the narrative about Trump's decline. It's going to be pointed to as evidence of something fundamental that has changed with Trump, that he's not the same force he was before, that the moment might have passed, that maybe his time is over. In politics, moments like this matter tremendously. Visual moments, moments that can be captured and spread and remembered and used over and over again. Moments that tell a story without needing words or explanation. That's what this AF1 hangar moment is. It's a visual story of decline. It's a visual story of a leader who's lost his grip and his energy and his ability to draw crowds and to command rooms. That's a story that sticks with voters. The footage of Trump at this event is already doing damage. It's already being shared and commented on and analyzed. It's already becoming part of the conversation about Trump's fitness and his viability. Every time someone sees that clip, they're going to remember remember it. Every time they think about Trump, that image is going to come to mind. That's devastating for a politician. Trump's whole thing has always been about creating moments that make him look powerful and dominant and successful. That's his brand. That's what he's always done. He's always been a master of controlling the narrative through imagery and through performance. But this time, the performance was a disaster. This time, the imagery showed weakness instead of strength. This time, the narrative is spinning against him, and Trump is going to have a very hard time changing that because you can't unsee what's already been seen. You can't unring the bell. The AF1 hangar event is going to haunt Trump for a long time. It's going to be the visual evidence that his critics point to when they talk about his decline. It's going to be the clip that goes viral every time he gives a low-energy speech or stumbles on stairs or looks exhausted. It's going to be the image that defines this moment in his presidency. That's the power of visuals in modern politics. They become symbols. They become shorthand for broader narratives. And this particular visual, the tiny crowd, the empty hangar, the low-energy speech, the stumbling, the exhaustion, all of it captured on video, is going to become shorthand for the narrative of Trump's decline. That's why this moment matters so much. That's why it's so damaging. That's why it's going to be remembered. Trump wanted to look strong and vital and dominant. Instead, he looked weak and tired and diminished. He wanted to show massive support and enthusiasm. Instead, he showed a tiny crowd in an empty hangar. He wanted to project energy and command. Instead, he projected exhaustion and confusion. That's a devastating gap between intention and outcome. It's a devastating gap between the myth and the reality. And in politics, that kind of gap is fatal. It's the kind of thing that ends careers and ends movements. This moment is going to be studied and analyzed and remembered for a long time because it captures something essential about where Trump is right now. It captures the decline. It captures the exhaustion. It captures the fading of the myth. And for anyone who's been paying attention, it's going to be the moment that confirmed what they already suspected. Trump isn't the same force he used to be. His crowds are smaller. His energy is lower. His moment might be passing. That's the story that the footage tells. That's the story that's already spreading. That's the story that's going to define this moment in Trump's political career. And there's nothing he can do to stop it because the footage is real and everyone can see it.